But to me, it's very hard to trust an institution that doesn't look very competent, because these answers, they look like he didn't do his homework.
Yeah.
It looks more like he's just repeating what Christine Lagarde said. And Christine Lagarde is not a neutral person to ask. Christine Lagarde is very biased. Her job depends on the euro being successful. And the euro might be threatened at some point in time by the Bitcoin. She has the ambition of having the euro as a global reserve currency. And if Bitcoin becomes that, it's not the euro. So you cannot ask a competitor about the opinion on Bitcoin. It's better to ask, to build your own opinion. You shouldn't ask anyone. You should do the research and build your own opinion. And then you see within minutes of research that liquidity is there. Bitcoin is more liquid than German government bonds. It also has a higher market cap, so more trading volume. So it's not a defensible position to say it's not liquid enough.
One thing I need to say, we are not against the S&P. As Swiss people using the Swiss franc, I think the S&P is doing a pretty good job. And as far as central banks are concerned, I think they're like at the top. But what we're saying is, why would you not use all the tools available to you, including new ones that are very performant, to execute your mandate better?
Luzius Meisser is former chair and current board member at Bitcoin Suisse, founder of Meisser Economics, which is a research company focused on computational finance and agent-based economics. He's also founder of Frankencoin, which is a stablecoin pegged to the Swiss franc, and board member of the Swiss Bitcoin Association. Yves Bennaïm is the founder of a think tank on Bitcoin's impact on society and represents Switzerland on the ISO for blockchain and DLT standardization efforts. He's also a regular contributor to Swiss business publications Bilan and Le Temps on Bitcoin. Yves and Luzius are both leaders of the Swiss Bitcoin Public Initiative, and today's episode is both an exploration of that effort, but also Switzerland's unique approach to democracy.
Luzius, Yves, thank you for making it to join the show at Seize the Future. This is the first time we've actually ever had someone come from Canton Schwyz to the Seize the Future studio.
I moved here because of the podcast.
Great. All right. Well, look, we're here to talk about Bitcoin Initiative, the popular initiative. And I'm a non-Swiss by origin, but I have become Swiss. Even I don't completely understand the whole way that popular initiative versus referendum work. Maybe one of you could give us an understanding, first of all, of how all of this works.
So the idea in Switzerland is that you have direct democracy and the people can propose changes to the constitution. So unlike other countries where it comes from the top, in this particular case, it can come from the bottom. So normal people, you and I, can gather 100,000 signatures from other Swiss citizens within a time frame of 18 months. And if that's successful, then it goes to the government, the parliament, and a couple of years later, it is submitted to a vote from the people. And if the vote is successful, the constitution is amended. Where there is a big difference with the word referendum that a lot of people don't really understand, because referendum means vote in general, but in Switzerland, it actually has a meaning. It's fewer people, but for a much shorter time. It's 100 days. I forgot the number of signatures, but I think 50,000. And this is when you are refusing a law that was made by the parliament. And you can also, as the people, say, look, we elected you, you're doing your best, but we refuse what you did. And therefore, of course, it will need to be voted by the people.
Okay, so generally when we're receiving that green piece of paper in the mail, that's for a popular initiative. Referendums are less common, I would imagine. Or is that not?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So it's just a different type of tool. A referendum is to appeal a law, and an initiative is to amend the constitution. In this case, we want to add just 3 words. So there's one clause where it says, gives the task to the national bank and sets up a national bank. It says parts of its reserves should be kept in gold, and we want to add and in Bitcoin.
Great.
The shortest initiative ever.
And maybe that would be a good moment for us to just understand a bit more broadly how this direct democracy works, because Switzerland's quite unique, actually, in terms of its government structure. In the UK, we vote for one of 3 or 4 parties. Generally, it's either Conservative or Labour Party. US, similar, Democrat, Republican. Maybe just give the audience a little bit of a taster of how democracy works in Switzerland.
So from a game theoretic perspective, it's very interesting. The Swiss government always builds a big coalition with all the major parties, like the 3 major parties, 4 major parties are included in the government. And that's because it's so easy to launch an initiative for a referendum for a party that has hundreds of thousands of members. Mm-hmm. So the politicians, they cannot afford to exclude one of the big parties from the government, because otherwise they could have very strong opposition tools. Mm-hmm. The initiative, for example. And that makes it a very cohesive, very boring, slow-moving government. But overall, it's good, because it's better if it's hard to create new laws. And overall, I would even say things that can be started from the bottom when you do an initiative. I would say the people are on top in Switzerland. And the government is serving the people and not the other way around.
Yeah, that's often a very different feel to other countries. Do you have any idea of how many referenda or popular initiatives there are every year? Is there sort of a good indication for people to understand how often people are being asked to vote?
So generally, we are being asked 4 times a year. So the normal schedule. Mm-hmm. And there's at every level, there can be different votes. And I would say it's like 3 agenda items per vote. So it's like 10 times per year that we vote on something, but it could be something at the community level, at the canon level, or at the national level.
Mm-hmm. And these are the ones that reach the vote. But at the moment, the collection, signature collection stage initiatives, I think there is like 14 right now.
Okay. And so they'll sort of come to maturation. You said that 2 years. They've got 2 years to collect.
A year and a half. But if you don't get all the signatures, of course, then it doesn't go to the vote.
Got it. And then what dictates the general success of a popular initiative?
So most of them are not successful. I would say 80 to 90% fail. Mm-hmm. Because normally when you have a cause with broad support, the pass through parliament is much easier. I think we have a special case here because there is a very strong principle that says the national bank should be independent of politics. Mm-hmm. So the politicians, they don't want to touch the national bank. So it's a more natural approach to say we go through an initiative, because the constitution is where the national bank and the mission of the national bank is established. And if you want to adjust that mission, it's the place where you should adjust it. We should not try to build this path of influence from politics to the national bank. This would be also kind of dangerous. I think it's good that the national bank is isolated from day-to-day politics. But if you want to change its mission, you also need to have cause to do that. And that's the initiative.
So it's at the constitutional level.
Yes.
And remind me the 3 words. And by Bitcoin.
And in Bitcoin.
And in Bitcoin.
Yes.
Okay.
In gold and in Bitcoin.
Got it.
So in our particular case, we are convinced, we are comfortable, we're confident with the fact that we will go forward. We'll get the 100,000 signatures, and we'll get the yes. But some people say, yeah, but what if you don't get the yes? If, as we're gathering signatures, the Swiss National Bank says, you know what, guys, let's forget all this. Let's sit down. You explain to us, there's something we don't understand. And in the end, they start becoming, really involved into Bitcoin. Was it a success? Was it not a success? Is it the yes? Is it really the constitution that we want to change, or do we want to change the way the SNB execute their mandate?
Yeah.
So success is a very blurry word in that particular case.
Okay, interesting. If you look at, I guess this is the first time that we're really seeing a proper nation state getting close to some sort of strategic Bitcoin reserve. And we can talk about other nations in this as well, right?
Of course.
And I'm not saying that it's a strategic Bitcoin reserve, but getting close to that element of the conversation. You've got actually very high rates of adoption of Bitcoin and crypto in Switzerland. I think it's somewhere between 15 and 20% based on, whichever data point you look at. But it puts it in the top 10 of countries globally. We talked about success. Do you think that if this were to go to vote, do you think that there are enough people that would want to support it out of that Bitcoin crypto community?
I think the crypto community supports it. It's also, I think everyone likes Bitcoin in the crypto community. Not all Bitcoiners like the other cryptocurrencies, so it's not mutual. But I think the crypto community likes this initiative. So there's some criticism from libertarians that say, we don't like the government. We don't want the government to be involved in our lives, and we won't disturb the government. So but I think that's wrong. We are part of Switzerland, whether we like it or not. Yeah. And then we can use the participation tools that we are given.
Yeah, I think, obviously you talk about the crypto community and, people like Crypto Valley or Bitcoin Suisse and these types of people. But what is your average Swiss person who doesn't really understand Bitcoin? What do they really think about Bitcoin? What does the media tell them? How are they thinking about it?
I think the average person doesn't like it. I see that when we comment on this in public established media, there's upvotes and downloads, and often it's 20% upvotes and 80% downloads. So most people, they don't like Bitcoin.
But you have to think that we have now, we just started in January. So we have 18 months to gather the signature. And then after that, it will go to the parliament. And then, they have to issue their, I don't know, if they support it or not. Like if the Confederation wants to support the vote for yes or no, because of course they also have a say in political parties and everything. So eventually the vote will happen in 5 years. You have to think, what was Bitcoin 5 years ago? No ETF. In Switzerland, we have PostFinance, which is the bank from the post office, which belongs to the government, 100%, which is very aggressive online and offline, like billboards in the city, pushing, encouraging people to buy Bitcoin. So you have to think, what will be the panorama in 5 years? And there is a fair chance that more people will know about Bitcoin better. There is also a fair chance that more people will be invested in Bitcoin because they will be curious at some stage. It's so easy now. You have cantonal banks also offering Bitcoin services, so it's not as secretive and weird as it was 5 years ago. So in 5 years, who knows where we are?
Yeah, that's true. Obviously, when you think about the length of the process, of course, like you said, there's going to be a process perhaps when the SMB calls you in and says, look, guys, we don't need to go to a vote. We need to understand what this is. That probably brings us on to the question of recently Mr. Schlegel, the fact that he was interviewed and he was quite negative. Maybe just give everyone context of what happened.
So for years, the media, when they talk to the Swiss National Bank, they at some point asked the question, what about Bitcoin? Why don't you add Bitcoin reserves? And in the past, they often said something like, we feel like this is not ready yet, it's not mature yet, we observe it and wait, which is okay. But most recently, Martin Schlegel, the director, said he doesn't. So it's interesting when he gets this question, he always switches from Bitcoin to cryptocurrencies, which is not the same. So, and he says cryptocurrencies are not out of scope for their reserves because it's not liquid enough. And also he said IT systems are known to have flaws every now and then. So he's worried about the security. And for me, in the same interview, he said it's very important that people believe in institutions, that people trust in institutions. But to me, it's very hard to trust an institution that doesn't look very competent because these answers, they look like he didn't do his homework. It looks more like he's just repeating what Christine Lagarde said. And Christine Lagarde is not a neutral person to ask. Christine Lagarde is very biased. Her job depends on the euro being successful. And the euro might be threatened at some point in time by the Bitcoin. he has the ambition of having the euro as a global reserve currency. And if Bitcoin becomes that, it's not the euro. So you cannot ask a competitor about the opinion on Bitcoin. It's better to ask to build your own opinion. You shouldn't ask anyone. You should do the research and build your own opinion, and then you see within minutes of research that liquidity is there. Bitcoin is more liquid than German government bonds. It also has a higher market cap, so more trading volume. So it's not a defensible position to say it's not liquid enough.
So it sounds like you're giving him the benefit of the doubt. He just hasn't done his work. Yves, do you think he's not done his work, or do you think he's definitively biased and lying to the people?
So the S&B is very secretive. It's very opaque. For all we know, they have Bitcoin already today. That we don't know because they don't have to disclose anything.
Mm-hmm.
We know that they have American companies, publicly traded shares, because they have to declare that to the SEC, and then it becomes public information.
Okay.
So if they didn't have to make a list of all their traded shares, American traded shares, to the American government, then we wouldn't know what exactly they have. One thing I need to say, we are not against the S&P. As Swiss people using the Swiss franc, I think the S&P is doing a pretty good job. And as far as central banks are concerned, I think they're like at the top. But what we're saying is, why would you not use all the tools available to you, including new ones that are very performant, to execute your mandate better? So what they have at the moment is that they are investing in all kinds of things. Like I said, for example, American shares on the NASDAQ. But their point is not to make money. The point of the S&P is not to make a profit. It's not a sovereign fund, for example. But it's behaving kind of like a sovereign fund because they have so much reserve and they're investing so much money that at the end of the day, it's good for their mandate. Because if you make more money, of course, you have more room to execute whatever you want to execute. So there is a thing with Bitcoin that is changing what they're used to. And at the moment, to answer your question, eventually, I'm not sure if it's not doing their homework properly or if they want to say we're not ready yet. We're still learning. We're still examining, we're still studying it, but we're not completely confident or comfortable with it. But you can't say that. If you're at the head of the S&P, you can't say that, obviously.
Yeah.
At the same time, you also don't want to say, oh, by the way, we think the ECB and the Fed are morons, and we think that, we're the S&P, we're going to do everything. They can't behave like that. They're not Bitcoiners, right? So they need to be very, very diplomatic, very politically correct.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, of course, they have to learn that because they can see that it's, a tsunami that it's taking over the whole world.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Maybe to put numbers on it, I think the reserves are about 800 billion.
Yes.
Of the Swiss National Bank. And out of that, they have, I guess, about 50 million worth of Bitcoin exposure through MicroStrategy stock.
Yes.
So I think they own about 500 Bitcoin worth of MicroStrategy.
Yes. Sorry, not only that, but they're actually investing in Bitcoin mining companies. So MicroStrategy, you could say, it used to be a software company and they only recently pivoted into a Bitcoin company. But still, if you're investing in a Bitcoin-involved, Bitcoin-focused company that has their treasury notoriously in Bitcoin, you can't do that without knowing what you're doing. But if you're investing in a company whose only activity is to mine Bitcoin and create Bitcoin, and the price of that share depends 100% of the price of Bitcoin, then you have no excuse.
So the excuse, of course, is they are just doing index investing and they're buying everything that's available.
Yes.
That was going to be my question. How much, if you look at their equity investments, is it sort of replicating a broad index of equities? Can we give that excuse to the mining?
Yes.
We can. Okay. So it could arguably be an indexing feature.
If I was in the position of governing the Swiss National Bank, And it would be a very hard decision to actually, it's a risky decision to go into Bitcoin. And one thing one could say is that, look, the consensus among the central bankers is that it's a very adventurous asset. And also we have a very strong tradition of being a very boring and stable central bank. So we don't want to be the first movers. Even if this becomes a reserve asset, global reserve asset, we don't want to be the first mover because we want to preserve our reputation of being risk averse and boring and stable. And I think this would be a very valid reasoning, that I would have to accept because it's true. And Switzerland is a lot about stability. And I would still find it wrong because I would, if I was them, I would put a little bit into Bitcoin as a hedge against the possibility of Bitcoin becoming the next reserve currency. But it would be a much more honest reasoning, in my opinion.
Yeah, indeed. On that subject, there is a popular initiative to actually ban Bitcoin in Switzerland, I heard about. Tell me a little bit about why that's happened. What sort of people are behind an initiative like this? I mean, clearly they don't understand Bitcoin. Why do they hate it so much? What is behind this?
I didn't go, but a lot of Bitcoiners went. So there was an event to launch that initiative. Basically, it's a environment protection thing. They're saying Bitcoin is bad for the environment. It's consuming too much electricity, too much energy, which we can talk about because this is also another topic. But what was interesting is that apparently it was so disorganized and unprepared that people starting asking questions. The Bitcoiners who were there, ironically, to see what it was about, started answering questions, and they ended up getting more people interested in Bitcoin than in that initiative. I think the initiative is a little bit frivolous, and I think it's going to be a even more uphill battle for them than for us, because at least we're not trying to tell people what to do. We're not even telling we're not even telling the S&B what to do. But we're definitely not saying that we want Bitcoin to become compulsory, or we don't want it
we are telling S&B what to do, but they have a very broad range.
So they have a lot of wiggle room. But what we're telling the S&B is that there is one option that is not possible anymore, but everything else is okay. But what we're not saying is, oh, by the way, from now on, you need to have like a gold standard where every franc is backed by a Bitcoin, for example. We don't want to do legal tender with Bitcoin. People can accept it or not, but we don't want to force it more. Whereas they want to make it that a certain software becomes forbidden. And it's going to be very, very difficult to convince people, and it's going to be impossible to enforce. That's one story.
Yeah, of course. I think it would be good to look at other jurisdictions that are exploring this. Obviously, the US most famously talking about a Bitcoin strategic reserve, which is now in recent days become
just a strategic reserve.
Crypto reserve. We won't speak too ill of that. But what sort of views do you have on the general Trump administration first steps? Obviously, making a crypto czar is a first step for any administration. I'd love to get both your thoughts on it, Luzius.
So I think it's the right step to establish a Bitcoin reserve, but the reason for this being the right step is different for the US than for everyone else. I think for everyone else, having Bitcoin as a reserve is something that strengthens a multipolar world order. Like the BRICS countries last October came together and said we need to have an alternative for the dollar. And of course, they cannot agree on one alternative because the Russians don't trust the Brazilians enough and the Brazilians don't trust China enough. So they wouldn't be able to agree on one common currency, but they might be able to agree one day on using Bitcoin as a reserve. And that, of course, is a threat to the dollar, which is an enormous advantage for the Americans. They can finance themselves more cheaply than any other country. They have the strongest financial system, they have a very strong capital market, and this all is a little connected to the reserve status of the dollar. So what is the best defensive move against this threat of the Bitcoin? It's for the US to start first, because once the US has a strategic Bitcoin stockpile, it's less attractive for the Chinese or Russians or anyone else to get into Bitcoin, because then they are making the dollar less important, but at the same time, they're pumping the bags of the Americans again. Yep. So it's an excellent defensive move by the US to get into Bitcoin first.
One argument that they're putting forward is that they're going to pay back the debt, which is just a garbage argument, because the US doesn't want, it has no interest in, pun intended, it has no interest paying back the debt. The US depends on the debt to grow forever until the end of the universe. It's very unsustainable, but as long as the dollar is the world reserve currency, they don't care. So what they're doing now with Bitcoin is kind of like they're hedging their bet. And they're saying, you know what, if it's going to be the next gold and everybody will want to have some, then we'll have some and we'll have more than others. If we are going back to some kind of a gold standard, even though not one-on-one, but like some of the money is backed by the new gold. And keep in mind, Switzerland was on the gold standard until the year 2000. So it's a very small window that we have absolutely, like the money is not backed by anything at all. Then, of course, now they would have some Bitcoin. And that would be very good.
I need to touch on the crypto reserve that was kind of announced by Donald Trump, including XRP, Cardano, Solana, and Ethereum. Obviously, there's been a lot of scammy behavior that's happened since Trump got into office with the Melania coin, the Trump coin. Do you think people in Switzerland understand? You mentioned that the Swiss National Bank governor actually keeps talking about crypto every time he's asked about Bitcoin. Do you think people understand the difference between Bitcoin and crypto in Switzerland?
I think this is a big problem, and all these not very. So there's no tangible value behind Trump coin or Melania coin, and all these actions, they are not good, healthy, because even those who love Ethereum, Ripple, and so on, they don't like it to be included in the reserve because all these cryptocurrencies are different than Bitcoin, and even if you like Ripple a lot, if you like Cardano a lot, most crypto proponents have an understanding that Bitcoin is different. And Bitcoin belongs in a reserve, strategic reserve, and others do not, because they are speculative assets that serve a different purpose. And this it wasn't a very good announcement. Also, the market movements are not very good. It's also not very good that some people benefited a lot with highly leveraged trades from the movement. So it doesn't look very nice.
It almost looks like Trump would like to attack Bitcoin by trying to, muddle the water and create some kind of confusion so that people would say, we don't want all that crypto, and they throw Bitcoin with it.
Yeah, I heard another theory, which I thought was a good theory, that he's actually doing the deal situation where he's like basically getting everybody saying, no, it's just Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's pulling the whole crypto community together. Yeah, everybody's saying, no, just Bitcoin. And then I'd be like, okay, just Bitcoin. And then that gets through much easier. And I think there's something to that. I mean, you never quite know what Trump's doing, right?
That's true. This is a pattern you see everywhere. He brings up a topic where he is maybe intentionally wrong, just to create a debate, and yet like it. The very first thing that he did in the first presidency is he said, we had the biggest inauguration ever. You can verify it wasn't the biggest. But for a week, everyone was talking about how big his inauguration was. And this a big win for him.
Yeah.
And it might be something similar. Everyone is talking about the reserve now. So the topic has the attention.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the fact that you've had the Winklevoss from Gemini, you've had Brian Armstrong from Coinbase. We even had this Ran Neuer crypto man from CNBC. Every single one of them coming out saying Bitcoin only. I think that actually is a very clear signal. You talked about this anti-Bitcoin initiative being pro the environment, and not understanding. It's interesting because when we talk about other countries, the UK currently is wasting about 13 million pounds a day of energy in wind energy in stranded locations that can't be used. In fact, they're now going to have to start spending money to shut these wind energy production centers down. And obviously, at the same time, they're raising electricity bills for old people in the UK that can't afford it. And so this is feeding through and creating inflation. Our energy minister in the UK is a guy called Ed Miliband. He's not the brightest of sparks anyway, but he has said, well, I don't want anything to do with Bitcoin because Bitcoin's a scam. But even if you think Bitcoin's a scam, you would want to mine stranded energy with it to monetize it for the benefit of the people, surely, rather than waste that money every year. Do people, I guess the anti-Bitcoin people don't understand this as well, but maybe one of you, Luzius perhaps, can give us an understanding of just how that works. How does stranded energy get monetized?
So, the Bitcoin has a very interesting property. Bitcoin puts a price floor on energy. So if you have a wind, solar, whatever project with a very volatile profile where you sometimes get a lot of energy and then none at all, it's very nice to have a Bitcoin mining farm in nearby, because then you can always sell your energy at some price. And this is actually very supportive of all these alternative energy sources because they're often very volatile.
Yeah, and if you think about long-term demand for energy, it's always on the upward trajectory. So having infrastructure there is important rather than trying to shut it down. I heard that actually Switzerland has loads of excess energy.
Everywhere has excess energy. In Switzerland, they're subsidizing people installing solar panels on every roof of every place. But the problem is the grid was not made to absorb energy that is so, coming from all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
So people can't plug. They actually install their solar panels, but they can't benefit from it. And the rest of the grid cannot benefit from it. And it costs money. So this is a real problem.
Indeed. And I think this brings me round to a sort of concluding question for the discussion is obviously Bitcoin versus crypto, the energy issues, pro or con, environmentally for Bitcoin as well. Should your initiative include some education, and how are you thinking about that? Is that something, obviously we're doing a podcast today, which is is helping. That's great. But, is there a broader way that we could be thinking about education to help the average person in Switzerland who really doesn't understand the difference between Bitcoin and crypto or the negative environmental issues?
So at the current stage, it's not about convincing the majority. It's about mobilizing the Bitcoins that are already there, because we need to collect these 100,000 signatures. And once we did that in 5 years, when there is a vote, maybe it can even take 10 years, it can take a long time. That's the time when we need to convince the majority. And I think convincing a majority today on energy topics or other topics that might change over time, where the public perception might change over time anyway, it's a waste of time. It's too early.
Well, it sounds like I need to sign your initiative. So
I think you have. You're Swiss, right?
I am.
Okay.
Do you have one with you? Is it possible?
You can download that sheet from the website.
Okay.
Print it and then send it to our headquarters.
I will give you a signature.
Or we can have coffee and you give it to me.
Yeah. But final question while I'm signing the initiative here. How are you guys, away from obviously Bitcoin, assuming you're continuing to allocate capital to Bitcoin, how are you allocating capital today? That's always the question I like to round out the interview on. So maybe you first, Luzius.
So I listened to this past podcast of yours where this glaciologist says he's all in on Bitcoin. And I actually wouldn't recommend that. So my allocation is a little more balanced. And over time, when Bitcoin grows in value, I tend to sell Bitcoins just because it's reasonable. You shouldn't, once Bitcoin becomes a significant part of your portfolio, even if it goes up and even if you believe in it, we shouldn't go all in. I think the responsible thing to do is to look at diversification. So if you have 0 Bitcoins, like the Swiss National Bank, or only 500, you should definitely add some. And if you have 80% Bitcoins, maybe you should sell some.
Yves, what about yourself?
I'm very boring, and I'm going to have a very boring answer. The only bad answer is to keep your savings in fiat. That's the only thing you should not do. Whatever else you're doing, maybe it brings you joy, maybe it brings you excitement, maybe you go over leverage. It doesn't matter. Do whatever you want. Me personally, because I come from a family that is invested in real estate, I'm very boring. Of course, I'm invested in real estate. In general, I like to have, very boring, the old-fashioned, the Swiss company. I don't want to be exposed to the US dollar because I think it's a ticking time bomb. I don't want to support the US dollar system because I think it's not reasonable the way it's managed. But I do believe in good quality Swiss companies, so I think it's fine. I'm not going to get rich out of it, but what I want is not to get rich with it. I just want that I don't get my savings, melting away like an ice cube because of inflation. In general, like Luzius, I don't advocate to go all in on Bitcoin, but I do want people to understand Bitcoin more in general. Because the more you invest in Bitcoin, your time and your brain, the more you understand where your limit is, even if you're not all in. And a lot of people are very afraid of Bitcoin today, which is understandable because you just don't understand it. And I think it's something that you have to start learning.
Gents, what a great way to finish. Thank you very much for the time. Great initiative, and very happy to support you. So there you go.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thanks.